Welcome to Daily Drive for Tuesday, July 1st, 2025. I'm Jamie Butters, Executive Editor of Automotive News here in Detroit.
And I'm Kellen Walker in Las Vegas. Today on the show, U.S. auto sales slowed a bit in June. Honda dials down hydrogen fuel cell plans. And Elon Musk is feuding again with President Trump. Could the CEO be deported? Plus, industry uncertainty bears down on auto suppliers.
I think it's no question that automotive industry is going through unprecedented level of uncertainty, very dynamic environment. So it's been a challenge for suppliers as well.
Let's run through all the news you need to know to keep up in the auto industry.
The U.S. light vehicle market slowed considerably in June after a strong spring fueled by consumers rushing to lock in prices ahead of new U.S. tariffs. Toyota, Honda, and Hyundai managed small increases in June, while Kia snapped a streak of 8 straight gains. Mazda was down 2, and Subaru sales dropped 16% for a second straight decline. Looking at the second quarter, Ford Motor, bolstered by employee pricing offers, posted a 14% increase. General Motors' second quarter sales rose 7.3%, with gains at all 4 of its domestic brands. And Nissan sales fell 6.5%. Results are still coming in. Analysts projected that June would be the first month of 2025 to see a sales decline from a year earlier.
Honda is downsizing and pushing back plans for a next-generation hydrogen fuel cell system, citing a deteriorating market for a technology that was central to its long-term strategy. It's the second time Honda Motor Co. has backed off low-emissions technologies. CEO Toshihiro Mibe dramatically cut investment and sales goals for electric vehicles in May. Honda said June 30th it would cut initial production capacity and delay the start of output of a new dedicated hydrogen fuel cell factory it is building in Japan. Honda will cut initial output by more than a third from its original plans to make 30,000 next-generation fuel cell modules a year. Honda had planned to start production before April 2028. Now it has pushed back the schedule, though it didn't give a timeline. The revision comes as Honda faces big U.S. tariffs and the likely unraveling of electric vehicle subsidies in the U.S.
Tesla CEO Elon Musk renewed his feud with President Donald Trump over the Republican budget bill advancing through Congress. Musk suggested he'll start a new political party. Trump mocked his former advisor for taking government subsidies and later said he would look into deporting the CEO of the world's most valuable automaker. The exchange, which started late June 30th over social media, marked a return to a battle that erupted in early June over Musk's opposition to the bill's deficit spending. Musk, who spent more than $250 million to support Republicans in last November's election, suggested he'd help remove politicians from office through primary elections if they vote for the bill. Trump fired back that Musk was upset about the elimination of EV tax credits in both the House and Senate versions of the bill. The Senate passed the bill today, 51-50, with Vice President J.D. Vance breaking the tie. It now must be reconciled with the House bill before it can be sent to the president for signing.
And the WNBA is coming back to the Motor City after 20 years away, with an assist from General Motors CEO Mary Barra and a member of the Ford family. Detroit, Cleveland, and Philadelphia have been selected for expansion teams in the Professional Women's Basketball League. The Detroit Shock debuted in 1998 as one of the WNBA's first expansion teams and won championships in 2003, 2006, and 2008 before leaving for Tulsa, Oklahoma after the 2009 season. The as-yet unnamed team will return in 2029. The Detroit Pistons are part of the team's ownership group, which includes Barra and Sheila Ford Hamp, who is the Detroit Lions' principal owner and sister of Ford Motor Executive Chairman Bill Ford. Other owners include current and former pro athletes and Automotive News Group publisher Casey Crane and his wife Ashley. And those are today's headlines. So Jamie, Honda delays and downsizes hydrogen fuel cell plans. Do you think this changes Honda's plans of 100% electric and fuel cell sales by 2040?
They didn't really address that. Luckily for Honda, 2040 is a long way out. A goal like that really probably depended all along on some battery breakthroughs, probably solid state or something like that. But dialing back on EVs and hydrogen, definitely makes it harder to meet that goal. I guess on the one hand, a lot of the EV investment that was pulled back was redirected toward hybrids. So there's still on that electrification path. But you're right. We should keep an eye on that 2040 target.
Gotcha. Coming up, changes to production plans and trade policy create special challenges for suppliers. That's next on Daily Drive.
Daily Drive listeners like you have access to the lowest price for Automotive News Congress 2025 on September 11th.
The event is where the industry's biggest players tackle its toughest challenges. Congress attendees don't just follow the industry, they lead it.
This year's featured speakers include Hyundai Motor Group Executive Chair Yusin Chung and General Motors CEO Mary Barra.
We are investing in America. We're creating jobs. That's creating IP in this country. And I think, the United States needs to lead in key technologies.
Join us to gain the insights and connections needed to steer your business through massive change.
To get the lowest price for the event, go to autonews.com/events, select Auto News Congress, and type in the discount code Daily Drive, one word, all caps. We'll see you in September in Detroit. Welcome back to Daily Drive. I'm Jamie Butters with Kellen Walker. The profound changes surrounding the auto industry, from tariffs to shifting EV plans to the adoption of software-defined vehicles, present special challenges to auto suppliers. In conjunction with the publication of automotive news lists of the top 100 suppliers in North America, Europe, and the world, our colleagues Hannah Lutz and John Irwin held a Congress Conversation live stream yesterday to discuss the array of issues that parts makers face. Their guests were Robert H. Lee, he goes by Bob, North America President of LG Energy Solution, Mark Granger, Vice President of Product Management for Automotive at Qualcomm Technologies, and Angela Johnson, Supplier Relations Principal at Plant Moran. Here's part of their conversation.
Bob, we're going to start with you on this one and then open it up. We're seeing substantial shifts in the market today with changing EV policy, tariffs, and acceleration towards new technology. How have you re-strategized or repositioned your company to quickly respond to these new dynamics?
I think it's no question that automotive industry is going through unprecedented level of uncertainty, very dynamic environment. So it's been a challenge for suppliers as well. I would say we're doing several things to try to address, the uncertainty that we're facing. One is trying to do some scenario planning. So we do have multiple scenarios that we are evaluating depending on exactly how the USMCA negotiations go or various tariff negotiations. And finally, the IRA, portions of the big, beautiful bill that's going through the Senate right now. So we don't really know exactly how those things are going to settle. So we do have some scenario planning, and we have to be flexible because we don't know exactly how that's going. The second thing, which is really critical for us, is very close communication with our customer base. I think, the relationship between OEM and tier ones have always been very important in this industry, but I think never more important than now, because with the long investment cycles and decision cycles that we have, especially for something like batteries, you really have to work in conjunction and make sure that we're in sync so that you're optimizing the capital investments that are being made. So we're having very close communication to try to understand what our customers are going through as well. And I would say that level of discussion is, much more intense and specific maybe than it had been in the past. So that's a really critical element. I would say the last thing, we're really focused on is sometimes when there's so many things that are swirling about you that you cannot control, you can get a little bit out of sorts with that. But we are trying to focus on what we can control, right? So we're going back to basics. And in our case, it's really about making sure we're cost competitive. With batteries, things like safety and quality are really critical. So I think in terms of our operations, we're really trying to keep our eye on the ball, make sure that we're competitive, we're ramping up with quality, with safety, because regardless of what scenarios plays out in, what I mentioned earlier, those basic capabilities are only going to be helpful. So, we're redoubling our efforts on our cost competitiveness as well.
Great examples. Thank you. Mark, anything to add from Qualcomm's perspective?
Well, I think, Bob mentioned unprecedented change, and I think that's been the story the last, 3-4 years, where the rate and pace of change is just amazing, right? So, in addition to all the elements that Bob talked about in terms of the, tariffs and all of this sort of thing, there's also just continuing to push the envelope in terms of technology, trying to anticipate how in our case, the electrical vehicle architectures of the future are going to evolve, and shooting in that direction, right? Because obviously, as a semiconductor supplier, there's time to architect and design that chip before it ever gets to market. And we need to make sure we're right on where the market's headed. So really very challenging, but also, frankly, very exciting times where you just see, can be massive change in just a short period, meaning 3 to 6 months, as opposed to some years ago, you'd talk about 3 to 4 years, right? So.
Yeah, we talk a lot about automakers' vehicle product development cycle, but I feel like we don't hear as much about the development time for a chip. It's not as quick as maybe some people think. That's an important thing to bring up. Angela, what about from your perspective? I mean, you look at the supplier landscape as a whole. How are you seeing suppliers sort of reposition themselves or re-strategize in this market?
I think we see a lot of the things that Bob and Mark just mentioned. Suppliers are buckling down across the board on their own cost effectiveness. So they're zeroing in where the relationships are driving unintended costs and how they manage those costs. They're also relying on an increased level of communication and better communication to help them navigate this uncertainty. The transformation comes with natural uncertainty. If communication is poor, that only complicates the matters. It leads the scenario planning that Bob was mentioning to be more complex and more ambiguous.
Angela, following up on that, we've been talking a lot for years about how automakers and suppliers both want more communication, more transparency in their planning. How open are automakers? How open have they been about their EV and technology plans, especially as they've been shifting so much lately?
I think you see a little bit of a mixed bag. And part of that has to do with a good dose of protectionism, maybe is the word. If the OEMs themselves are still certainly trying to lay out their plans, adjust their plans on the fly, it does introduce a bit of hesitation on what you are going to go forward to your supply base to communicate if tomorrow might bring a different direction. So what suppliers may perceive as a lack of communication behind the walls is likely trying to ensure that the best information and the most stable information is getting to the supply base in the first place. And definitely the level of communication depends on trust. So the more trust between the two partners, the more willing the OEMs are going to be able to share their plans. Unfortunately, all of them have had cases where sharing has resulted in perhaps a leak outside of the realm that it was intended, which causes consequential damage to the OEM and to the supplier.
One thing I'd like to add to that is that I do think the major OEMs have been much more transparent and trying to communicate. They've had town hall meetings, they've invited to supply days and things like this. So I think in general, they understand that there's a lot of uncertainty, and they're also trying to communicate better with the supply base. Having said that, though, I think the uncertainty that I spoke of, OEMs are facing that themselves, right? In terms of where they're going to produce what vehicles when, and those are all things that they're also trying to run scenarios. And so I think they're also trying to work through what their specific plans are, and it's difficult for them. So I actually think the effort has been, quite positive. But again, they themselves are going through some of these decisions, and until it gets settled, right, they're not able to give clear guidance to suppliers. And I think we're in a little bit of that mode as well.
Okay, yeah, that's a great point. Just uncertainty all around in the industry. Semiconductor suppliers and even battery makers are, I would say, relatively new to our list of top suppliers, which we published on June 23rd. How do you see your relative roles and positions in the industry developing over time? Mark, we can start with you.
Well, I think maybe I'll just rewind 7 to 10 years ago, right? You typically had, very structured OEM specifies, I want this sort of functionality in an ECU. Tier 1 goes off and architects it, makes a selection of a semiconductor, everything else, and then goes to a sourcing thing on the semiconductor side, right? What we see more and more and more every day is a much tighter relationship between OEMs and technology providers, well ahead of when, let's say, an official ECU is necessarily commissioned and kicked off, but really understand where are we going with technology? Where are they going? Back to my comment about chip development timelines and whatnot, super important to get feedback from some of the leading OEMs to influence how we're going about. And of course, the reciprocal is good for them, because when they give us some of that insight, we can really, have a hopefully slam dunk when it comes to the chipsets that we come out. So I think that I see that as continuing to go on, such that it's really sort of a triangle between tier 1 semiconductor suppliers, OEMs, and of course there are many OEMs out there in the world that are trying new and different supply chain models, right? And that's certainly something that we see various people trying to either take on more or delineate the work slightly differently. And so it's another area of change in the industry where not only is, EVs versus ICE, SDVs, centralized computing, distributed computing, but, all of this comes together. And so it makes it very important for the technology companies to have this very tight relationship with OEMs.
Hannah Lutz is director of the Tech and Innovation team here at Automotive News, where John Irwin is a supplier reporter. They were joined by Bob Lee from LG Energy Solution, Qualcomm Technologies, Mark Granger, and Angela Johnson with Plant Moran. You can hear the full conversation on Automotive News social media pages. It's probably easiest to find on LinkedIn. You can also check out the top suppliers list if you have an Automotive News All Access subscription. That's Daily Drive for today. I'm Jamie Butters.
And I'm Kellen Walker. Thanks to David Phillips, Hans Greimel, and Lawrence Iliff, as well as Jay Davis of our sibling publication, Crane's Detroit Business, for their reporting for today's podcast. You can get the latest news on suppliers, auto sales, and everything happening in the auto industry at autonews.com.
Come back tomorrow for a discussion about how the federal government is looking at regulating, or rather deregulating, automated driving.
There's a valid concern that if you have a robotaxi with no steering wheel, you're able to meet some but not all of the federal motor vehicle safety standards.
We'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you think of the show and the topics we covered today. Send us an email at dailydrive@autonews.com or leave us a voicemail at 313-444-2774. And if you enjoy the podcast, remember to like, leave a review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.